Hello and welcome to my opinion archive. In today's video, I'm going to tell you about my second trip to Belarus or White Russia. I have already made a video about my first trip, which I'm going to link in this video. And in this video, you're going to hear about my second trip and what I experienced. I might repeat myself a bit because I can't remember exactly what I said in the first video, but the experiences has been different and I have been to different places. But there might be a few things about the country or the city that I still find interesting that I'm going to mention again. So just like the first video about my trip, I'm going to try to have some pictures that can show what I'm talking about. But due to the nature of our trips, some of the pictures will have people I know in them, and I'm not going to use those pictures because I don't know if those people want their picture on the internet in this way. So sometimes there might not be a picture that exactly describes what I'm talking about, but I'm going to try to have them when it's possible. The first interesting thing I always realize when I come into this country, and I have only been there 2 times, but it is a thing I realize when I come into the country, is that their houses are extremely colorful. And I have pictures of this, so you're going to see what I'm talking about. And I really find this interesting. I sort of like it because where I come from, the houses are a little bit more dull and dark in the colors. So the bright colors of some of these houses are a very different thing to look at, and I sort of like the contrast to the nature. You can clearly see all the houses. I think it's really nice and I think it's quite pretty. A thing I also noticed in the cities, and that's mainly because my parents told me about this practice, but now I've also seen it both in this trip and the first trip, is that the cities we come to have this wall with pictures of people that live there that have done something interesting, something good. It's sort of like an employee of the month sort of wall, except for it's the citizen of the month, if you can call it that. I think this is a very interesting practice, and it's not something we have where I come from, and I don't really know what to think about it because on one hand, it makes for this interesting sort of way of awarding people who do something good. On the other hand, I'm also thinking, is it necessary to do this? Is it sort of promoting some sort of competition to be on this wall? But I see it as a potentially good thing. I just don't know whether or not it's something I think we should adapt or use in my country. But I think it's interesting practice. And now to some of the things I have experienced on my trip. As I stated in the first video, the reason why we are there is because my parents deliver things. They have a voluntary work where they deliver things to the country, such as beds or clothes and things people need. And in that capacity, we sort of get to see where these things go, so they can have an idea about the things they gather, where are they actually being used and what are they being used for. And some of the things end up in schools. So we were around in many different schools to see how these things were used, and this gave me an interesting look into how their school systems function, which is quite different from mine. The first thing that happened when we visited this school was we got a welcome by some of the students who made like a traditional dance of theirs in like some traditional clothing, and I think this was very interesting and also fun to see, and I was really impressed by it because they didn't know we were coming until like the day before. So this must be something they have practiced in case people come to see the school. And I was thinking when I saw this that I was so impressed that they actually got the students to do this. Because where I come from, I think it would be very hard to find kids that would voluntarily do this. And I don't know if it was voluntary at all. But they seemed quite happy to perform for us. and I'm going to have some pictures of this. I do have a video about it, but I'm not sure if I can use it. But if I decide to do so, I hope you will enjoy it. If not, I hope the pictures can convey an idea about what the experience was like. After this, we got a tour around the school to see the classrooms and how they used things that were given to them, which was in this case computers. And I really think it was interesting to see because, well, a school is a school, so it is very similar to my own. Classroom looked like I suspect a classroom to look like. The students have their seats, they all turn towards the teacher who explains things. But one thing I noticed was the amount of discipline there was in these classrooms. The kids were very quickly quiet when we went into the classroom. They stood up. They were very polite. You could clearly see that either this particular school or the school system overall has an emphasis on being respectful and has an emphasis on doing as the teachers are told. And of course, all school system has this kind of focus on doing what the teachers are told. But where I'm from, this kind of discipline is not something you see every day. Another thing I realized was the use of uniforms. There seemed to be this very weird thing where some of the kids were wearing uniforms and other kids weren't wearing uniforms. And I haven't really heard or seen this anywhere else. As far as I'm aware, it's usually you have school uniforms and everyone wears them, or you don't have school uniforms. I haven't really heard of a place that does both, where the children can choose whether or not they want to wear a school uniform. Maybe this is a thing and I just haven't heard about it, but I found it interesting. Now for the next thing I experienced. We were at I would call it daycare, I think is the proper translation, for disabled kids. And this was very interesting to see, because in the nature of my work or my studies, I am studying to work with children. So for me, this was very interesting to see how they do things. And I realized a lot of things because they don't have that many resources, they don't have that much money. So many of the toys and things they had were quite simple. And for me, this was very interesting to see because when we in my country are going to look for new things we can use, new things for the kids, we either think about buying stuff and then figure out that we don't have the budget to do it. We don't really think about making the things ourselves. And because we don't really know how to make the things ourselves because we're used to buying the things. So it was very interesting to see what they did, and it gave me a look into how you can do things with less resources. Another thing I learned when we were at this daycare was the fact that many of the ways they work would never really be allowed in my country. And that's simply due to the way we have a much bigger focus on worker safety and more focus on working conditions. And the thing I realized was that this place wasn't really built as a daycare for disabled kids. So it had 2 different floors and no lifts for children who couldn't walk. This means that if the children has to go to the second floor, then the employees have to lift the children up at the stairs and down the stairs. And they said they do this every single day because that's part of their work. And I was thinking, if this was happening in my country, our government would step in and do something about this. Because people wouldn't allow this, because it can really hurt these workers in the long term. Maybe not now, but if they do this for many years, it can really hurt them. And this just gave me an appreciation for the way our country works and the rights we have as workers. Now I have 2 things left I would like to tell you about, 2 experiences from places we were in. But before that, I realized that there was a fact about the schools that I forgot to mention earlier on in the video. and that was that many of the old schools have their own miniature museums inside about the history of the country, which means it's very simple and easy to take the kids to see a museum because it's probably just down the hall. I think that was very interesting that they have this kind of thing inside the schools instead of in a different building. And as I learned, it's only the old schools, maybe because they have a lot of these things. But it was a very interesting concept, and I don't really know whether or not it needs to be brought to my country or other countries. But it was interesting to learn about this sort of practice. Now for the last educational related experience, and I really want to thank you guys for sticking with me to this video because I know a lot of people probably don't think education is that interesting, but this is about a different country, so I hope you learned something. The last educational related experience I had was a university we visited, and this was very interesting. It's quite different from where I go because the school I go to currently is specifically made for the job I want to do in the future, and this university was more all around with different classes, different things you could become, different focuses. But one thing I found interesting and learned from it was that the school has, once again, a sort of employee of the month, sort of picture on the wall thing. And I have seen this before, if I am not mistaken, it's also in America, where they have these sort of walls with pictures of students who are doing well in certain classes. But what I also learned about it was that in this university, this also goes for the teachers. So the teachers has pictures of which teacher is the best in certain subjects, which creates this sort of competition to be the best teacher and or the best student, which I don't think is that healthy because it makes for a competition where you maybe should focus on helping one another rather than beating one another, because this is an educational system and not a sport game. But this also ties very interestingly to the way their educational system works. As I learned from our interpreter when I asked her, because she is a teacher in this university, so I asked her how does the system work? Because where I come from, we get a certain amount of money each month if we are doing an education as a way to live and a way to encourage us to, finish our education. What I learned from her is that it works sort of similarly, but the difference is that if you do well in their school system, you get more money. So if you get good grades, if you do good, if you show up to classes, you get more money. If you do less, if you don't do as much work, if you don't get as good grades, you get less money. And this was a very interesting way. I don't really like it because where I come from, the mentality is sort of like everyone is equal, so you get the same amount of money regardless of how well you do, because you are all taking this education or a education. But I can see the logic behind this, that if you do well, you get more money, thus you are encouraged to do well, which should hopefully make good students. And just before I go to the last experience, I have 2 facts from this university and the school system in general. From the university, I learned that the people who are on this wall who are doing very well get a personal letter from the president, which is very interesting. I highly doubt he makes them himself. I sort of just think he puts his name on it. But if he actually makes them himself, I'm sort of impressed. The other thing I realized in every school we came to and the university, because we usually get to meet the head of these schools and see their office, every one of them has a picture of the president in their office. And this sort of seems like just a thing, and it's also around the schools. They have the national emblem on the walls, a lot of focus on their nationality and their president. And this is just very interesting because you never see this where I come from. You never see pictures of our prime minister on the walls on any official buildings. You very rarely see any sort of emblem or sign of our country or nation. Of course, on some buildings you do when they are official buildings belonging to a ministerium or something, but not on schools. Now for the last experience I want to talk about. And this is not going to be educational related whatsoever. So if any of you are tired of that, this is going to be about shopping. Completely different change in focus here. But during our trip, we ended up in a shopping center or a mall. I don't exactly know what word to use here. But this was very interesting because we came from the city, from the country, and we've seen the difference, the living standards, the sort of broken houses, the wells outside the buildings to get water. Yeah, I said that, wells to get water. It's how it works there. So it was very different, and it was very, very old-timey, I think, really felt like coming into a different time period. And then we come to this shopping mall, this modern-looking shopping mall, or shopping center, with everything you could imagine. It looked like something from home. It was pretty. You could buy everything you would buy every other place. And it was just so different to see this contrast in living standards. And the interpreter we went with told us that this was a kind of place she couldn't afford to be in. And remember, she is a teacher at a university. She cannot afford to use this modern shopping center. She cannot afford to buy the things that are there. So it just shows that the rich people in this country really have so much more money than everyone else because they can afford to buy these things, and somehow the government can afford, or whoever made this can afford to make a modern shopping center in the middle of everything, while people outside they have to use the wells, as I said. So it's just really different to see how this contrast is, how big it is. That was the first thing me and my parents and everyone else on the trip realized. It was just so radically different from what we just came from. Thank you for watching. As always, this has been My Opinion Archive. I hope you found this video interesting. I realize that the topic may not be interesting to everyone, since the educational system isn't exactly the most thrilling topic ever, but I hope you found it interesting to learn about a different way that the school system can work. I also realized that the end of this video maybe didn't give as much context as I should have, but I don't really know how to convey the difference in the living standards. So I hope that what I said gave you an idea about how different this was, because you really have to experience it in order to get this feeling of just how different these living standards can actually be. If you have any questions to me regarding this trip, anything you want explained better, I first of all hope the pictures can help to give you an understanding of what I'm talking about, but if that doesn't help, please leave a comment. I would like to try to explain it better, but just a fair warning, English is not my first language, so my written comments might not be the best way for me to explain what I experience, but I do hope you will, regardless of this little warning, try to reach out to me if you have any questions, because if I can answer them, I will try my very best, because I really want to convey this experience. I really want everyone else to just experience this very unique country and its different ways, because for me, coming from a very different way of living, I find it very interesting, and I would like other people to get a better understanding of this country.